Are we on?
Yep.
Okay, welcome back, folks. We're going to have a brief conversation on how we can use, if we use 109 and 133 State Street when the section is. There are some real logistical issues with using 109 and 133. Staffing issues that may be occurring, particularly within our sergeant at arms, because we are spreading out as a legislative body. Also, access issues logistically in terms of getting members back and forth between those buildings. And then the public having access to some of the buildings and how to work that. So I would open it up. And I must say, we are really trying to figure out how we can bring the legislature back here come January in a manner that works for all of us, is efficient, and people feel okay being together. I don't think we can ensure safety from infectious disease from anyone, or between anybody. We can all do our best for vaccinations. We can wear our masks. But to come back into doing our legislative work in the most efficient way, I say this holding my nose, but we've gone through gyrations of looking at rooms 9, 10, 11 in the lounge and other complications that arises. And maybe an option we also need to really weigh in is looking at option 4, which is coming back as we always have in our own rooms, and keeping the lounge as the lounge, keeping room 9 as the coat room, room 10 and 11 as our larger meeting rooms. So we come back, really talk, try to make sure people are vaccinated and make sure that everyone wears a mask. Maybe option 4, maybe we need to vet that a little bit too. Next meeting. Just want to put that on the table because we're just, we're really doing our best and we just keep coming up against obstacles that we think might work, and then we start talking about it, and then there's issues. So with that being said, 109 and 133, are there possible uses of that? John?
My personal opinion is I do not like 133. I find it a depressing space, and I would go as far as to say using it and having the public come in there is beneath the dignity of the General Assembly. So I've got personally no interest in that space. I think if we're going to use space, need space, we should focus on one of them. And I would much prefer the pavilion over 133.
The pavilion, just the pavilion, or the other floors in 109? I mean, the auditorium, I was thinking the
I'm
auditorium.
talking the
The
space
spaces that
where
we
the
were-
library was.
And possibly the auditorium. Well, we always,
Well, yeah, but
we have that in there.
sure, we don't control the auditorium, so we can't be sure it will be available anytime we want it, I assume.
Other folks? Butch?
So I have to agree with John that I'm thinking more about accessibility for members and quick accessibility. We have taken away.
A little louder, please.
Okay, we've taken away the ability of the caucuses to meet, all caucuses to meet if we have to take a break on the floor. The biggest caucus would certainly probably meet within the well. However, that leaves Republican caucus and the Progressive caucus with potentially no place to go. So, and if we need something quick, 109 has much better access for the members to get to a space, even if it was in the auditorium, or maybe the Progressive caucus might want to meet up in the library area where we met. And it's much quicker than going down here, and if you have trouble with the stairs going out, go down the ramp and then the whole length of the building, down the elevator and then back around again. So I really think if we're going to use an off-building site, 109 makes the most sense for me.
Allison?
So for caucuses when we're in session, that means all these big committee rooms are actually available. So smaller caucuses, we still haven't talked about the Ethan Allen room, but the smaller caucuses could meet in Ethan Allen room.
That's a
or-
caucus, that's a committee room.
So the smaller caucuses could meet in any one of these larger rooms because everybody would be on the floor. So it's, again, looking at spaces, trying to look at spaces effectively and using them as flexibly as we can. I would think actually you could stay in the building. I don't think you'd have to leave the building. Same with the Senate. I mean, if we have a small caucus, the minority caucus can meet in any one of our committee rooms or in the cloakroom, and the larger one could meet in the chamber. So I actually think while we're in session, we're okay. It's the larger caucuses that are open to the public that are a little more challenging, I think. And it would be great to have overflow space that we could count on. I think and I would agree with John and Chuck. I think that 109 presents more options, more spaces closer together. Those 3 rooms in 109 that are on the second floor are much, they're 2 big rooms right next to each other, plus a small space, and the possible use of the auditorium when available. I think that it makes a little bit more sense than 133.
Folks?
So keeping in mind, this is a temporary fix.
Right.
With respect to the caucuses, we're making an assumption that they have to meet at the same time. I don't think they do. In the House situation, I think the Democrats could have a half an hour, and the Republicans could have a half. Keeping in mind, this is a temporary fix.
Democrats don't,
Right.
aren't quiet enough.
Joe,
You know what I'm saying?
Joe, Chuck was talking about when they're in session, when they then break out. That was what I was addressing, not the weekly caucus.
I will repeat what I just said. You are making the assumption that both caucuses have to meet at the same time.
Well,
There are possibilities that can be bantered about in order to accommodate that situation. One of those possibilities is they don't meet at the same time. They may be out of the chamber as a collective unit for a longer period of time, but they don't have to meet in the chamber at the same time. That's one option. Another option in the House situation is you could get permission from Senate rules to come and use the Senate chamber.
exactly.
All of the smaller caucuses can be either meeting in a Senate committee room that's not meeting at that moment in time, or can meet not during the hours that we are meeting as committees in the larger rooms. This is a temporary fix.
Oh, absolutely. But when I said in session, I think Chuck was referring to when we're on the floor, he wasn't talking about the caucuses that we normally meet weekly. He's talking about, I believe he was talking about in session when we're on the floor and you have to go to caucus. That is at the same time.
I heard,
And so, I mean, that's what I was addressing, not the other caucus.
I heard what you said. What I'm saying is, if they take a break from the floor to caucus, it does not mean that they are prevented from meeting, said that wrong. They do not have to meet at the same time. They will be off the floor for a much longer period of time as we accommodate both of them. Because you'd have to have the Senate, the Democrats meeting first or second and the other body meeting at the other time. But let's just say for a hypothetical, they say, we need the caucus. Okay, the Speaker of the House says we're gone out of here for an hour. Half an hour, first caucus meets. Half an hour, the second caucus meets. It's not convenient, it's not great, but it's a temporary fix.
So you just struck a chord with me where we can meet. Why couldn't the the second caucus meet in the cafeteria.
Yeah, exactly.
Just-
It's not lunchtime.
Yeah,
Well, we wouldn't be on, well, yeah, hopefully. we wouldn't be
No, you're right,
on lunch,
cafeteria.
But
cafeteria is available and committee rooms are available. So,
It's workable.
I hadn't broached that thought, so.
That's one reason why we don't have to employ new personnel to babysit 109.
I don't know how much,
Problematic.
I don't know how much logistical problem the cafeteria would be for Sergeant at Arms, but
Well, we just would,
it's a public caucus anyways.
well, you know, if somebody's sitting there with their lunch, to be
Well, wait,
frank, it
They're
would be a
public.
little bit difficult.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah, if someone's having
Lunch and a show.
coffee.
if they had, okay, pick your stuff up and move to one side,
Yeah, I mean,
Because-
we've kicked the Senate, a Senate committee
tell me about it.
meeting. And so,
So
I guess we
109,
have options.
so what I'm hearing is that we're not interested in 133, but we have some interest in 109. And we don't know what that interest is per se. But we do know that there's an auditorium there, so if we have large meetings, we could use the auditorium. The other question are the interests, are the issue caucuses. They tend to meet in the morning prior to committees. They tend to meet at lunchtime. Those are the two times that they tend to meet. They don't meet afterwards in the evening. So would our recommendation be that those issue caucuses, if they're small enough, they would meet in committee rooms that would be available, that are in the House? If they're large, like the climate caucus or social equity, they should be over in the auditorium in the pavilion.
Or even, Madam Chair, if room 11 is being used as a committee room, it's still a shareable room for a caucus,
Right.
just like
Depends
any other committee room, right?
Right,
I'm
but
I'm
I can.
bringing you along.
yeah,
I know,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, depends what committee is in there.
Right.
yes.
Permission of the chair of that committee. If it's appropriations committee, that's gonna be a whole different bailiwick.
Right, but they're not going to move, right? Oh, different.
And
appropriation.
Madam,
House approves.
Madam Chair, in the same light of that, if there's legislative staff or committee assistants working in those rooms, do they get kicked out? And where do they go? How do we accommodate them if and when those happen?
Well, that's sort of happening.
That
That's
happens
sort of
now.
happens Now, a little bit if you're in the room.
But a lot of these caucuses are scheduled, like the climate caucus on Wednesday. I don't know about the social justice. I think sometimes they met kind of
8
later in
o'clock.
the day.
Yeah, They're
We
8 o'clock.
were too, and we did mostly during COVID,
Yeah, so they
Social
were
equity,
meeting
we're in
early.
the morning, like at 8
Okay.
o'clock.
8 AM.
And rural economic
So
development.
if we
is in
knew
the
ahead of
morning.
time.
Right.
For those, maybe,
But they all meet in and around committee schedule because they are, you know, they obviously can't meet during committee time.
Anything else on this one before we move to our report with Michael? John?
Just, that's the obvious thing though, and I mentioned it before. Most of the business caucuses meet, because we have such a busy schedule, they meet early, as you said, or during lunch. That means wherever they meet, it's gotta be a place where you can have food.
Which takes out room 11
no,
Well-
we've been
And
flexible.
the auditorium,
11 is,
and the auditorium.
or right now, there's no food allowed in the auditorium. Could be changed, but
Well, there are places that food goes that isn't allowed that David doesn't know about.
is that right?
Option 4, here we come.
There we go. So the Rutland County Caucus shared a committee room last year for our weekly caucus meetings. And it was the Ethan Allen room, and when, or 2 years ago, when Natural Resources moved into the Ethan Allen room, we lost our meeting room. So the chair of Natural Resources was kind enough to work with us. Yeah, and she would hold back her committee meeting start on the Wednesday when we met from 8:30 to 9. We're always
Mhm.
that kind
Able-
of generosity, my guess is will be prevalent.
It could be, and we always made sure we were out of there 15 minutes ahead of their committee start, so at least Actually, some of our committee attended our meetings. It's nice to have. But it was, it can be done.
Exactly. I think people will be very
Always look
generous.
into Putting panels up on that back end of the.
I love that.
No, we looked at the,
Yeah.
I mean, I know we can't do it permanently, but putting up temporary, sound panels up there and not really dividing the room, but giving it the divided feel.
so maybe,
If we're gonna use it for receptions, that'll be a challenge.
let's move on, okay? It's 4:45. Michael?
I have.
Been waiting all day for this.
Okay.
It's big, the
Thank
big
you,
thing
Mark.
at the end.
You're welcome.
You're a trooper.
I am gonna Zoom and then share screen. Is that cool, Mike?
Make you co-host.
You can do that from an iPad, Mike?
Yep.
No, I'm very impressed. Oh, right. You can zoom on iPad. That's when there are too many devices open at the same time.
This,
Yeah, I think Joe's right.
That should be good.
Right. Okay, so it's up.
Yes, it's right here. And we have it right here. I passed it out.
I'm just gonna walk through what it is and point out what I've done, and I open to any feedback or edits that you want. So I put in a table of contents, you get the statutory charge, function, the members, the summary of the proceedings and the advisory. Any conclusions, and then there's an attachment if you want to include any floor plans or any of the other documents that you may have received along the way. There you get the statutory charge. I won't walk you through that because you've seen it before. Same with the functions of the Legislative Advisory Committee. One thing I usually do when I write these reports is I include the members of the committee so that people are aware who's making the decisions and who they represent. So that's sub C. Then in sub D, I thought because you're going to eventually hold probably around 7 meetings, that it would be worthwhile to give a short summary of what you have done. This is very basic. It's very general. I didn't go into a lot of detail, but it effectively summarizes the testimony that you've received at the meetings that you've held so far. And then I give it a general overview of the committee's recommendations and what they're based on, and then you get to the advisory committee's recommendations. I went through all of the recordings to make sure that I was getting the right recommendations and approximating the language of the agreements to the best of my ability. These are not exact recordings or exact repetitions of what your motions were, because sometimes your motions were either informal or needed to be fleshed out a little bit. And then there were some where you discussed a lot, but you didn't really reach a conclusion. And
We're still discussing a lot, not reaching
We're still-
conclusions. That's where option four.
subdivision 2 is an example of that, where it's bracketed, or whether or not you're gonna require vaccination or proof of vaccination for entry and mask or other personal protective equipment. That you had discussion about that in a couple of
We did.
meetings, but you never Pardon?
We voted on it.
We voted on that in that number one,
You voted on number one.
should not be required to be vaccinated, and that implied that we would not ask for proof of vaccinations.
But we haven't decided, as you raised, Madam Chair, about masks.
We have not decided about the
So,
mask.
I think masks.
About vaccine.
I went back for Senator Shaw, and I looked at the motion, and it was one, definitely, the vaccination is not required. And then there was a discussion of whether or not proof should be required or mask required. He never really,
Good.
Waffled on it.
right, it was, let's think about that, or let's come back to that, and there was never that final decision.
Got a big star beside that one.
Well,
I think the intent, if we can, well, I think the intent was that we would not ask for proof. If you're not going to require people to be vaccinated, you're going to heavily encourage people to be vaccinated. I think we were implying that we would not ask for proof of vaccination. That was sort of how I was thinking of it at the time. That was me personally. I don't know about other folks. Do you agree with that,
Okay.
Allison?
yeah, I thought that, I think the open question is the mask.
It's the mask. We have not determined.
And I would encourage us to wait till our last meeting to make that decision because of what's happening with,
Things are evolving.
it's evolving.
We,
I, of course, would love to have require proof of vaccination. And when Tracy Dolan was on, I actually called in and asked on Vermont Edition and said, what are the plans for Vermont to get a QR code so that we can all show easily that we have been vaccinated? And she said, well, we haven't made that decision yet. I said, well, New York State's done it. Anyway, so they're discussing it.
so the conversation we did have, hang on, John, conversation we did have about masks was talking about requiring folks that were not vaccinated
Right.
to wear masks. And the feedback was you're targeting them. It's really,
I
they may not feel comfortable wearing a mask because then it really says to people I'm not vaccinated. There was some concern there.
well,
So John and then Alice.
The changes that we're seeing just today, recommendations from CDC, I think that clearly suggests that we will not be able to make a firm recommendation by August 15th about whether masks should be required. I think that we're just gonna have to say so, that masks, whether or not masks are required will have to be decided as we get closer to the date based on current CDC recommendations.
good.
I don't know how we could responsibly say anything else.
Maybe the recommendation should be that the body follow current CDC recommendations.
Or at least reassess once we are closer to the date and
I would say reassess.
respond to.
I think that's wise.
Yeah.
I think that's wise.
We can't at this point say, we don't know what January is gonna look like.
Yeah, we may
Whatever
not.
we decide now is gonna be wrong in 3 months
Yeah.
anyway.
So are we comfortable with that analysis of what John just put out?
Yes.
And Michael, can you put that, okay.
I think that is a good, wise suggestion.
Okay.
And then,
Should I move on?
Yes.
yeah,
So then you have the motion, the agreement that the standing committees should meet physically within the State House during the 2022 session. One question I had there is, do you want to have that conditioned at all? The motion wasn't conditioned, but
Conditioned on what?
if current conditions, COVID conditions remain the same,
good point.
if the governor does not issue an executive order or emergency order, et cetera. So that, I was thinking about that, but your motion in the meeting didn't address that. So it did not.
Good point.
Does it matter?
It goes to John's point about where we might be in.
Steve?
Does it matter that we don't put a condition on it? Because if there is an emergency order or the rules committee gets together, it's going to override our recommendation anyway.
That's true.
Right.
Preface it with if possible. Preface it with a if possible comment.
Right. It's like if any.
All right, so I'm gonna leave it as is.
Yes.
And then if you want to revise it at the next meeting, you can.
Mhm.
The next sentence was what you were just
Yeah.
discussing. Other legislative meetings such as caucuses or public hearings should use space within 109, 133, which you said you don't want to use, so I would have to
Cross it
revise
out.
that.
Or elsewhere in the State House.
Okay, or elsewhere in the State House.
And
Then the discussion you had with Secretary Bloomer, use of the well for the Senate chambers. It's also proposed as a potential meeting space for certain non-standing committees, subject to approval by Senate.
right,
So,
Well, non-standing. We also talked about joint committee meetings of
Okay.
standing committees too. So if you just say non-standing, that prohibits.
yeah, I would say for joint, yeah, joint and non-standing.
Okay,
We're changing that from our proposed discussion to we recommend.
you want that to be a recommend, yeah?
That's just my opinion. I don't know what anybody else feels that way.
But aren't they all prefaced by, this is what we recommend?
Well, the sentence reads, use of the well, the housing in the Senate chamber was proposed as a.
Oh, right, we recommend,
Change that to we recommend.
right.
Okay, moving on to sub 4. This was a kind of, this committee discussion was, you all kind of generally agreed on this, but then you just kind of drifted away from the discussion about the card room not being used for presentations by advocates or special interests. 2022 legislative session to prevent congestion and allow for greater airflow in the hallways of the third floor.
That was one of our dangling items that Butch put out in terms of not allowing the card room to be used for displays to relieve the congestion and limiting various afternoon lobbying receptions to one a day.
Yeah, we haven't discussed that, but I,
Discussed that, and then how we use the cafeteria and not having those coffee receptions in the morning. So that was all intertwined with the use of the card room.
We're having it in the large spot.
Wow.
We're gonna have to get a coffee machine for institutions.
Lieutenant Governor.
I would support now number 4, and I think we need to have more conversation, given it's 5:05. I think we need more conversation about what we want to recommend with the Ethernet, with the Cedar Creek room and the cafeteria and the schools, because we have schools receptions to discuss further, I think. Those bear further discussion, I think.
So have our danglers as more conversation.
Yeah, but I think I agree with this, our recommendation for number 4.
This says should be paused, which means nothing for presentation by any group in the card room.
Great idea.
I
What
would
about
say we
Cedar
agree-
Creek?
I could agree with that. It should-
More space.
I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, David.
It kind of gives us a
Really.
reset.
Yeah, it's time to reset,
Yeah,
sure.
here.
Whatever your name is.
Whatever my name is, Alistair.
Alice.
It's a vowel. It's a vowel.
It is. Did we ever talk about the press conferences that happen in the Cedar Creek room?
We haven't talked about
No.
the Cedar Creek room really yet.
We've only talked about receptions that are
Yeah.
held there.
Because sometimes there's
Jam
major
packed.
pumping around the
No.
press conferences, and I don't know that they're all necessarily
We talked about
hours.
we talked about the air quality numbers are 30 in that room. So
Yeah.
I know we're not going by that particularly. And perhaps, Chief, I'm not sure we ran through that number yesterday, the conference room number, or the Cedar
The
Creek.
Cedar Creek room.
I didn't mean to derail this, but it seemed like that.
Well, I think it's
Part of that,
part of our Cedar
yeah.
Creek room discussion, which is why I think we need more time than 4 minutes.
Okay,
Okay.
moving on then. So you'll reserve the questions about the cafeteria,
Yeah.
Cedar Creek rooms, schools,
Better.
for next. Number 5 is that the videos, conferencing and live streaming tools used in 2021 should continue to be available for use by standing committees. However, the advisory committee recommends that JLMC or the House and Senate rules develop protocols or rules for the appropriate use of the tools, including protocols on when to use the tools, when to allow persons to participate through video conferencing, and how to police inappropriate use.
Allison?
So I think what John Bloomer flagged for us here is the use of this in the chambers. So I think we need to have some discussion of this for the chambers.
John?
I think we need to add in here as well about archiving and how long. it'll be.
Oh, right.
It's,
Archiving it, how long we keep them.
And is that
rule
some,
we would make, or is that a archives rule?
yeah, that's basically what I was, is that something that you want joint rules or joint legislative management or to address?
I'm not sure, but
It needs to be
the
discussed.
fact that it's sitting out there forever, I think is bothering a lot of our colleagues. So some limitation for how long it sits there available and is it going to be maintained as part of the official state archive? Question should be decided by joint rules. I think those decisions.
Yeah, joint rules is probably the good choice for that one.
Okay. Moving on to
And, well, saying that too, is YouTube the appropriate format?
Yes, we talked
Talked
about.
about that.
going down to 6. Whether the following 5, and 5 is in brackets because there was discussion about whether a house could be on edge should be moved as well. Ones that you did agree on were room 26, which is Senate Ag, room 32, House Ag, room 33, House Corrections and Institutions, House 41, Committee on Energy and Technology, House 42, House General Housing and Military, and 47, House Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife. But there was a discussion. Representative Ansel raised it of whether House Committee on Edge. Well,
It's got one of the biggest rooms.
Yeah, I think
I don't think it,
what we've been talking about is where House Ag is now. Commerce, Corrections and Institutions, and then upstairs, Energy, Technology, General, and Natural. I don't think we're talking about ag.
There was confusion over House Ed and Ag.
Yeah. They flip-flopped. Because House Ag, House Ed right now is pretty good size.
Giant.
The question is how Education Committee may move out of there because they may need a bigger room, which means another committee that's being kicked out of their room could move in there.
so I will strike the reference to House Ed.
Yes. No, House Ag. Not to House Ed, because they're in the smaller room.
No, House Ed is actually.
That's right, they're in it. See how confusing it can be?
They used to be.
Right.
Exactly, exactly.
I remember because I got bumped out of there.
Nice.
Right. Yeah.
Madam
John?
Chair, I apologize. I have to go.
I'll just point out that if we discuss option.
Then in 7, to allow all standing committees to meet within the State House, the following rooms should be converted from their traditional legislative use. Used by legislative standing committees. So, Room 10, room 11, legislative lounge.
Should we qualify that by designating it for a specific period of time?
For this one session.
just to give
Right.
people a feeling like
Right,
maybe this isn't.
right. For the 2022 session.
Should I move on? And then the rules committees in the Senate and the House should assign standing committees to the staterooms converted into legislative committee rooms based on the perceived need, physical space during the 2022 legislative session due to the high profile, controversial, or historically popular issues that a committee to address in 20.
Should we mention yet the potential swap of the pro tem's office in Senate
What
Ag?
did she?
Should you mention the potential swap of the pro tem's office for the Senate Ag?
Is that premature? Or
I understand that that is an agreed to statement of fact now. I can't remember who it was that told me that, but
I've only heard it from
The
the
pro
pro tem.
tem was on her Facebook speaking about it and said a possibility. So it wasn't, I mean,
Maybe we make that recommendation
yeah.
to the management committee.
let's make that recommendation.
Okay.
So what are the outstanding issues? I'm thinking we should be meeting again next week.
So
John and then Steve.
Oh, I was just saying.
Good sitting.
I think we have decided in discussion that all of the Senate committee rooms are too small to house House committee. So is there, all these rooms we're talking about converting to committee rooms, I'm assuming there'll be House committee rooms, right?
That's been the assumption.
So I'm wondering why the Joint Rules Committee would make the decision. It seems like it would be the speaker.
What section are you in?
They're currently shared. 8. It's the Rules Committee in the Senate and the House should assign standing committees to. Decide who goes.
So do you want me to qualify that because Senate committee rooms are too small, the House committee?
Well, we've discussed that they are, that the largest, what did you say? The largest Senate committee room has 7.
Seven.
And the smallest house is 8. So it's not like the Senate could move in here and one of our committees can move into a Senate room.
So I'm gonna throw in a monkey wrench and Joe, don't kick me under the table.
No, I'm going to hit you above the table.
Are we gonna mention or any recommendation on the Senate committee rooms, sharing committee rooms? Knowing that that would free up maybe 1 or 2 committee rooms. That the next question would be, for what purpose would we use those committee rooms that are opened up? And where would we put the committee assistants?
Like the second question is more important first. If we have a real need for one of them, then make the recommendation to chair. But unless we've identified we need a room for this, why would we make it?
So we don't have
He
a
said
lounge.
that, I.
Just putting, we could use it for a lounge.
No, I mean, yeah, but so, yeah, the
We could
lounge,
use it for a lounge.
The Senate
okay.
has a lounge. They have the Senate club.
No,
Well, that-
all I'm saying is we ought to identify the need before we say we should do it. You can,
Right.
I might take that $10 bill later.
Cheapskate.
I think the lounge is an issue that we haven't resolved yet, for more than one room, and then for Mike's folks too. So depending on what we're gonna do there, we'll talk about what we're gonna do for the lounge. So I don't think we could, that needs a little more conversation.
So we don't forget it, should we have a placeholder for the move of the operations? Should all this fall into place? Legislative operations group into the 30s.
That's Mike's thing.
Need a placeholder for that in this report yet.
And I also have, earlier today, you said you recommend that joint rules or JLMC adopt an appropriate building capacity, an appropriate individual room or space capacity for the State House. And that once it is determined what the appropriate capacity is in the State House and individual rooms, that training should be conducted to inform chairs how to respond to committee capacity issues.
Personally, guys, I can't stress that enough. You can't dump all of this education, monitoring, enforcement on Sergeant at Arms. You've got to have individual committee rooms governed in a way that assists the Sergeant at Arms, and that's going to require training.
Thank you. I agree, Joe.
You're going to be the one giving the training, right?
Yeah, let me give the training.
Another Hayes the clerk opportunity, right?
Okay, the other conversation you had today was about HR moving to 2 Aiken. Do you want that as a recommendation?
We were waiting, yes, I think we made that decision last week, that HR would move to first floor on 2 Aiken for 1 or 2 of those offices. The deeper question is next week to see if we have further information in terms of cost estimates to whether or not to get in the mess of electrical wiring and other items in 2 Aiken. And the flip side of that, in conversations with BGS during our break, we get too expansive in some of the construction, could open up other layers of issues. And I've asked them for next meeting to just lay that out bullet form. Could be ADA things that are brought up, it could be fire safety things that are brought up, so we have to be careful on some of that. So I've asked Stephen and Joe to just put that in layman's terms in a bullet form. So we're very well aware that if we go over certain levels, it triggers a whole gamut of things. So we have to be really aware of that. So that's continued conversation next week.
I also emailed Kevin to see how much money from 2.5 is necessary to move into 133, how much money is needed to retrofit the committee rooms for the video conferencing, live streaming, and where that money's going to come from. So he hasn't got back to me because he's got conflicts, but hopefully I'll have that information tomorrow.
I think for 133, and I think Catherine confirmed this, there's money from previous capital bills for renovations.
There's $700,000 for the fit up of the first floor area.
That's separate. That's separate money from the
That's
2.1.
separate.
Right, right. That's,
Or 2.5.
But I thought the whole cost was going to be more in the neighborhood of $1 million.
I'm sure with the
It's true.
IT side of it,
Very well could.
yeah.
Oh, Joe's
This
still
was-
here, yeah.
This was allocated to fit it up as office.
Hi, Joe.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
it very well could. But we were just sort of been programming, we meant. Right,
Okay.
on it, so
Long day.
we will be back.
So for next, do you have anything else, Michael?
Nope.
I had
John?
I'm just wondering if it would be all right to add a section. What I'm thinking, we should state in here that we have reviewed contemporary error handling recommendations and decided that it's not feasible in the short term to follow them. However, that we feel it's really, really important that we proceed with design, funding, and construction of contemporary air handling for the entire building.
The HVAC,
VAC, yeah. And I always forget, ASHRAEs, what is it?
ASHRAE.
Or whatever it is, but I think we ought to say we've reviewed it. It's not feasible. We really, really think it's important that we move forward in a very timely manner to upgrade. Is that okay to put in there?
Mhm.
Yeah, you do.
back.
So for the agenda for next week, we need more conversations about Cedar Creek receptions, the cafeteria, press conferences, school groups. We also need to discuss more about the live stream and the YouTube. How long, give some recommendations maybe on how long that should be out there in the archiving. And we need more conversations about Mike's folks, where are we gonna put the lounge? And also feedback from Kevin about dollars that are needed for IT upgrades. Did you get all that?
No, I got IT upgrades before when I moved up. I'll rewatch the video and pick it up then.
Did I,
We'll talk.
did I miss anything?
Do you want to be in this room next week, same time, same day? Room 11? Want to take the coat room first then? You don't want to take the, wait,
So right now,
10's pretty nice.
How about room 10?
We could do room 10.
Nice
I'll
high
tell you,
floor.
the layout of these tables is not good to run a committee.
fun fact, we had to
Stephen
take
redesigned
a
them.
portrait down that had a face because the camera kept reading it as a face.
Like, well, we have good chairs to sit in and.
Uh,
I don't think so.
No,
The regular
I think you put the spiky ones in room 10.
the regular old cushion seats that were.
Oh.
Oh, those are the cushion ones,
Yeah, the regular chairs.
as long as you don't have the ones from room 11.
I wouldn't recommend the
Yeah, bring
coat
your
room.
donuts.
There's a horrible echo in that room right now.
Coming back.
Now, I have a question. Are we going to try to meet with JLMC to get those few questions answered regarding Kevin's stuff for going ahead and for Arlene's HR so that we can continue getting that
Carolyn,
done?
I only had one issue in that line
That was for
question.
Kevin.
It was for Kevin, and I said that it was really important that we meet
Already
ahead of time
started.
before our report gets issued to make decisions so that Kevin can get marching orders to get his equipment ordered.
And I think they're almost there, Joe,
They,
because
Carolyn responded to me and said,
So I may be,
note, I
right, I may be.
message to the speaker and the pro tem.
Here.
arranged
Have to
the
order,
meeting.
The pro tem's on vacation.
Pro tem is on vacation this week.
but they won't fit.
Tim was on
But in
vacation.
a nutshell, Janet, I think yes is the answer to all of your concerns. We ought to get something out there and enable those people to get moving without having to wait for a formal report and then a formal meeting of JLMC.
I know.
And next week, it's also Betsy Ann Rast, for the parliamentary.
Betsy Ann's back in next week, yeah.
Yeah, so that'd be on the agenda too.
You, Michael, are you leaving?
I'm here next week. I'm not here the week after. I'll have to remote in next week. Sorry about that, but I've got a childcare issue.
And I'm out next week, so Peggy's gonna cover this committee, and I staff JOMC, so I don't think, they might meet next week, but they won't, I won't be able to help them.
So anything else? So next Tuesday, 1 to 5. Same place, room 11, room 10.
Well, what would you like?
Let's do room 10.
Might be a little tight with this big of a committee, but we can do it.
Let's do room 10.
Okay.
May all have to wear masks, but let's be prepared if we have to.
Madam Chair,
Mhm.
Commissioner Fitch and I will both be away the next 2 weeks.
That's right, you're going away next.
Deputy Commissioner O'Grady will join on behalf of the Commissioner's office.
Okay, have a good vacation. Anything else before we finish up? Again, thank you folks for your due diligence, patience, your commitment. I really appreciate it.
Don't let anybody,
Huh?
don't let anybody go anywhere. Janet, just send us an email.
Janet who, Miller?
Cancel.
Canceled. Is she watching us?
No.
We're still meeting, huh? Just got this message. Where is she here?
Yeah, she's in Alaska. Yeah.
That's probably coming from Alaska.
She's in Alaska.
Salmon fishing
Is she really?
Where in Alaska?
I just got this message.
near Anchorage.
CDC?
She has family.
Any policy affecting staff should be handled by, and policy affecting other than staff by rules.
And we wouldn't do that anyway.
I'll recommend requiring masks. I don't remember getting this email.
If I,
That just came, you were probably driving up.
I was driving up. I didn't-
Victoria, Angelica, toward the end of this week, Friday,
Well, we're going to talk about the mask situation next week. Well, sort of. We were saying, at the time it will be decided, but maybe we could
be all
make a further recommend that, if it's affecting staff,
better.
management committee oversees staff, right? And that, if it's legislators, then it's rules committees. So maybe we just incorporate that.
Okay, will do.
Anything else before we're done? Thank you all. We'll see you next week.